And so I'll go through, and every member has their own code. I'll look at the bills, and Logan and I and my staff will go through the bills. And I can't read every one, obviously, but someone on my staff is going to read every bill. And I've got a yellow, green, red sticker system. If I know I'm voting no on the bill, it's a red. If I'm voting for the bill, it's a green. And my yellows are, I'm just not sure yet. And I have to talk to the senators on the floor. Well, one of the things that helps me is the report. Because the committee report will, for example, I'm not on transportation. Robert Nichols is on transportation. Senator Nichols is someone I have great respect for. I trust him. So if I look on that committee report and he's voted no on the bill, that sends a big signal to me.
Dan, you might mention to him that those committee reports are online also.
Absolutely. Everything is online.
Hey, Dan.
Yeah.
Stay in the microphone. We're recording.
Oh, all right. I'm sorry. So you know, I may go to Senator. It's a circle of trust. I'll go to Senator Nichols and I'll say, Senator, you voted against this bill, and it came out of committee. It passed 6-3, but you were one of the no votes. And because I know he's a rock-solid conservative and someone I trust, he's going to fill me in. And he may be the difference of whether I vote or not vote for the bill. On the flip side, I'm vice chair of education. He's not on education. So the same thing, he'll study every bill, and his staff will study every bill. But if he has a question about a bill, and he looks at that committee report and sees it came out 6-3, and I was one of the 6 who voted for it, he'll come up and say, hey, because he trusts me as a fellow conservative, Dan, tell me about this bill. And so that's how it works. We have to depend a little bit on each other because we're not on every committee. In the Senate, we're on many more committees. I serve on finance, redistricting, education, health and human services, criminal justice, flooding and evacuation. I think there's one more I missed somewhere. In the House, they serve on 2 or 3 committees because there's 150 members. So how do you work that system on the floor, Dan, in the House? Because you all can't go to everyone on every committee every time. There's so many members. So how do you all filter that process?
We have a system very similar. I mean, now Phil and Wayne and I used to be on more committees than we are now, but but anyway, it's a very similar process. Our staff is very helpful to us as we go through and make sure that. You know, if it's a green, we know what we're going to do. If it's a red, we're not sure. And we have strong trust in those individuals. There's an old story about, you know, your first session when you come to the legislature, you're going to read every bill. Your second session, you say, I want to read every bill that comes to my committee. And the third session, you say, who wrote that bill?
One other thing, too, for me, each day when I go to the floor, my staff gives, you know, the first part of the session you're spending all your time in committees. And then it gets to where there's more and more time on the floor, and eventually the committees aren't meeting at all because all the bills that are going to make it have already progressed to the floor. What my staff does for me every day when I go to the floor is they hand me a floor packet. And for every bill that we'll be voting on that day, they'll have notes on there for me. And one of those notes is how many calls did I get about this? How many people asking me to vote for it? How many against it? Which ones were from the district? If there's somebody I knew that called, they make a note of that. And there's many times I'll pick up the phone on the floor and call John back in the district or Sue back in the district, say, okay, I've seen you said vote against this. Tell me what I'm missing, and we kind of talk over it a little bit. But I get a daily report so I know exactly what my constituents are telling me with regard to that bill.
So the bill is out of committee, it comes to the floor. Explain the process. Brian Hughes, explain the process after you turn your phone off there. How a bill gets to the floor in the House.
All right. So after the committee process, there's another step in the House that's very important, and that is the calendars committee. All right. You have the substantive committee, public education, transportation, public safety, whatever it is. We've been through that process, got our hearing, got the votes. You're still not there because then you're sent to the calendars committee. Now the calendars committee is an interesting operation because the calendars committee meets in secret. It's the only, one of the only committees in the House that can meet behind closed doors. Now we know who the members of the calendars committee are, and so we can, once my bill is passed out of the committee and gone to calendars, I'll go to the chairman of the calendars committee. I'll go to each member. I'll say, hey, my bill's in calendars. Are you okay with my bill? And then I go to each member of the calendars committee to try to make sure they're okay with my bill. And if they are, and they vote for my bill in calendars, then it can move on to the floor. It's interesting because sometimes in calendars, since the meetings take place in private, you can go to every member of the committee. They tell you they're okay with your bill, but your bill still doesn't come out. It's the strangest thing. I don't know why that is. It just happens sometimes. And I guess they're being nice. They don't want to tell you they hate your bill. But anyway, any member of calendars can slow down a bill, and enough members can absolutely kill a bill. And we never know what happens. There are no fingerprints. That's just part of the process. And so that's a really big step we have in the House. I guess y'all don't have a calendar committee in the Senate necessarily.
No,
that's a big step in the House.
Right. In the Senate, it's a different story. We have, and I've been fighting this since I first was elected in 07. Some of you have seen the blogs or my emails that go out or my postings on Facebook. The Rosebush bill, the blocker bill, also known as 21. Why do they call it the Rosebush bill? Because typically what happens is some committee will pass a bill having to do with landscaping. I think this time it has to do with parks. And that's the first bill. And I always tell folks, think of it as a line of traffic. And there's only a one-lane road. Well, the car is stalled up front. Well, that's the landscaping bill. It never gets voted on. It never gets passed by the legislature. It blocks all the cars or all the bills behind it. So you have to go around it. And to go around it, you need 21 senators to push your car around it. So there are 31 senators. I have to have 20 other senators to join me to go around the Rosebush bill, the blocker bill. It's the mechanism we have in the Senate to control bills. And there has to be some mechanism, by the way. When 12,000 bills were filed last session, or 8,000 or 9,000 bills, not everything can come to the floor. So it's a filtering process through where it goes to committee. Does the committee vote it out or even hear the bill? Then it goes in the House to calendars. In the Senate, it comes out of committee, and it's in that line of traffic behind the Rosebush bill. And you have to get support in the Senate. I have a little green sheet. If you ever sit in the gallery in the Senate, I feel like I'm selling siding or something. Because I walk around and it's got every senator's name on it. It says yes, no, go away. And I go around and say, are you with me on this bill? And once I get my 20 signatures, I'm 21, I then take it to the Lieutenant Governor. I turn it in and say, I have my 21. Now he still has the right not to bring the bill to the floor. He's the President of the Senate. I cannot think of that happening. I mean, I can't remember that happening if you have your 21 votes. And from a conservative standpoint, the reason I've been fighting this bill is real simple. And this is more politics than process. There are 19 Republicans in the Senate and 12 Democrats. If you have to have 21 votes, you can do the math real fast. The Democrats in the Senate can block any bill they want. Or any 11 members. It's not always Republican-Democrat. It could be 11, because you need 11 to block, right? 11 from 31 is 20. You're stuck at 20. It could be rural Republicans and rural Democrats blocking a bill they think will hurt, rural Texas. Correct, Ralph? Yeah, so step up here. So we have to get 21 votes in the Senate, then to bring it to the floor. I only need 16 to pass it, but I need 21 to get it out. And so I've been fighting the 2/3 rule because Thomas Jefferson was clear. Our founding fathers looked at, are we going to have a 2/3 rule in the U.S. Congress? And they decided no. They decided that a simple majority should rule. And Jefferson said, and Madison said, the minority should not have power over the majority. And that's what we have in the Texas Senate. We have the minority of 11 senators having power over 2/3. And Washington said that as soon as you give the minority power over the majority, then you risk losing life, liberty, and freedom. So I've been fighting that. My first session, I got up on the floor and fought it, and I lost 30-1. I was a freshman. They didn't want to hear from a freshman coming in to change the rules. Last session, we convinced enough members to change it for voter ID, or we would not have gotten it out. And this session, we changed it for voter ID. I want to change it for every bill. That's the only reason we got voter ID out. But the good news was, John Corona from Dallas stood up on the floor and said, Senator Patrick has changed my mind on this issue. And a number of senators put in the Senate Journal that they opposed a 2/3 rule. So I'm up to about 10 votes now. And we just have to keep working session after session. So Ralph, tell the folks, if your bill gets out of calendars, what happens next on the floor?
I'm going to tell you some interesting things. Of course, last session was my first session. And to learn the process very quickly, it's good to get to really know who your members are, as they all talked about. Relationships are very, very important. but we all recall the chubbing process and voter ID, correct? That was one of the most brutal times I had sitting there on the House floor, because it's Memorial Day weekend, and here we're going to hear a local consent calendar, which means we're going to hear about 200 bills this day that we hear normally on Tuesdays and Fridays. And the process is so simple that normally we hammer out those bills in about 4-hour, 5-hour time. But at the beginning of each session, we also set the rules of engagement more or less for all House members. So to a certain degree, when local consent came up, we knew, we had already heard that the Ds were going to carry an attack on what they call chubbing to stop voter ID from ever coming to the floor to be able to get a vote on it. And so starting at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, going to midnight on Friday evening, same thing Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, we had this chubbing process that took place. And of course at that time, there was no time for voter ID to get hurt, much less even some of the sunset process, which came crashing down at the end also. So there's a lot of different techniques like that that really we lost control of. And it wasn't any member, particularly our fault, on the our side voter ID to get done, because we all held together pretty strong that we weren't going to let the Ds take advantage of us and pull something else in on TDI and try to do some reform stuff that was going to go against tort reform and so forth. But the bottom line is even during that process, you love this. I had a local bill, which everybody pretty much agrees on, that affected my district. And on the second reading of this chubbing process, I had a long-term House member come over to me and says, "Ralph, your bill is going to go down today." I'm thinking, what are you talking about? My bill's a great bill. What's wrong with it? Nothing wrong. No, I'm teed off at 2 senators over on the Senate side. They're not going to hear my bill. So guess what? I'm going to kill 4 of their bills right now. Now, what he meant by that was he's going to talk my bill down more than 10 minutes, which means it's not dead. It goes to general calendars. But at that time, the session, it's dead. Long story short, I went over and grabbed my senator and talked to him. I said, "We got an issue here." And we're able to come back over, talk some sense into the person that wanted to take it all down, and we won. But the bottom line is there's lots of maneuvering that goes on in the process on all these bills. I don't care if they get out of committee. Sometimes that chairman will sit on that bill, as they all talked about, because they heard from other members that didn't like it. So you don't even have to be on the committee to kill a bill. I'll manage that several times during session. So, or at the same time to make sure that bill got moved, because again, it's the trusting factor amongst other members and so forth that also helps a whole lot. But I do want to put a little plug in. We have a group that a lot of us all belong to. It's called the Texas Conservative Coalition. And we do get a lot of feedback as they're talking about red tag, yellow tag, green tag on bills. We can't read every possible bill, but we do rely on our caucuses and groups like TCC to really help us sort through some of the garbage of some of these bills to make sure we're voting in the right direction. Well, that helps.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. Now,
there's a question at the back.
We're going to hold questions till we get through the presentation. We'll go back and do those, okay? So a bill gets out of calendars in the House. It gets to the floor. They get 76 votes. Of course, it can be amended. They pass it. It comes over to the Senate. In the Senate, I get my 21 votes. I bring it to the floor. We amend it. We send it over to the House. Now, what happens at that point? Debbie Riddle, why don't you just briefly tell us what happens at that point when a bill comes over to you all and you all send a bill to us?
Well, at that point, I had a bill, House Bill 8. I've got laryngitis, so bear with me. It can go into conference committee. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, first of all, what happens if you send a bill like when you had Under God in the Pledge?
Yes.
Okay. Let's go to the next slide for a second, Logan. Can we do the next one for a second? Okay. Yeah. And we're going to get to the different types of bills here in a moment. Mm-hmm. But what happens is Debbie sends a bill over. And sometimes people get hung up. What's an author and a sponsor, a co-sponsor, a co-author? What are all these people? Okay. If you're the author of the bill, Debbie was the author of putting Under God in our state pledge.
I authored that on the House side.
She authored it.